The year was 1920. The newly elected Warren G. Harding was inheriting a mess from his predecessor, Woodrow Wilson. He didn't give speeches about how he inherited it. The country was in a depression with record unemployment, massive debt, and a bloated and inefficient federal government. It was as bad as anything in 1929 or 1930. They didn't use a stimulus package or tax increases. What was the secret? How did we get out of it? Watch this. The year was 1920, and America was in a crisis. Soldiers had returned home from World War I to find that their jobs were gone. Unemployment doubled to nearly 12%. Stock market was on its way to losing half of its value. The gross national product was in free fall. Outgoing President Woodrow Wilson's decision to involve America in World War I and his dyed-in-the-wool progressive agenda left the country reeling. Wilson had used the war effort to grossly expand an already bloated federal government, and in an effort to redistribute the wealth, he raised the top income tax to 77%. The end result was a country deeply in debt with an economy that was on the verge of total collapse. This was the Depression you probably never heard of, wiped clean from our history books. Why? It's called the Forgotten Depression. More on that in a minute. Another key factor in this economic nightmare was the action taken by the Federal Reserve, another Wilson-era progressive idea. As times got tougher during Wilson's last term, the Fed began to print money and make it easier to get credit. Even as America's 29th president, Warren G. Harding, took an oath of office in 1921, the country was on the brink. He wasted no time. His plan was astonishingly simple. No bailouts, no stimulus package. In fact, just the opposite.
Between 1920 and 22, the federal budget was in fact cut roughly in half. They cut top marginal income tax rates and marginal income tax rates for all groups substantially throughout the 20s. After they cut marginal tax rates so substantially, they were also able to cut the national debt, not the deficit, the national debt, by 1/3 during the 1920s.
The budget was cut in half. Tax rates reduced in all income brackets. The national debt reduced by 1/3. In 18 months, America rebounded. The result? The Roaring '20s.
It was during the 1920s that millions of Americans bought their first radio, millions of Americans bought their first refrigerator, their first car. The number of Americans who had telephone doubled.
President Harding died of a heart attack 2 years into his presidency, but his successor, Calvin Coolidge, continued what he had started.
I want the people of America to be able to work less for the government and more for themselves. I want them to have the rewards of their own industry. This is the chief meaning of freedom.
Limited government and free enterprise fueled one of the greatest success stories in American history. Again, you probably never heard of this.
We never hear a thing about the Depression of 1920 for obvious reasons, because we might draw the wrong conclusions. We might conclude that maybe these policies could be implemented today. We're not allowed to draw that conclusion, so this episode is simply left off the table.
What the history books can't deny is just 9 years later, in spite of all the country had been through, progressive presidents, Herbert Hoover, FDR, following Woodrow Wilson's progressive playbook of bloated government, massive spending, and sky-high taxes, led us back to the brink, the Great Depression. And by the way, in another undeniable example of progressive revisionist history, you, me, our kids have all been taught that FDR's New Deal proved to be the salvation of America. Nothing could be further from the truth. The New Deal expanded government to levels approaching a dictatorship. Taxes reached obscene levels, and the era of government entitlements, many of which are still choking our economy today, was born. The New Deal prolonged the Great Depression in America. As other countries around the world rebounded years earlier, America suffered through a full decade of hardship. And yet, surprisingly, unexplainably, it's that very solution that serves as the model for our leaders today as America once again suffers through a crisis brought on by progressive leadership. The Forgotten Depression, forgotten no more. To know where you are, you've got to know your history, where we've been. We'll be able to see the future. We have Art Laffer with us today, and Chris Edwards is here. He's the Director of Tax Policy Studies at Cato Institute and the author of Downsizing the Federal Government. Is this your website too, Downsizing the Federal Government?
It is, downsizinggovernment.org.
It is a great website.
Thanks,
I didn't know that was yours. Great website. In this, so you know, this week we're going to spend some time talking one topic. Making sure the mutually assured economic destruction doesn't happen. And as all the globe starts to come down and reboot, we want to be a place where everybody rushes and pours their money from the rest of the world. We can be the safe haven. We can turn it around quickly. We just have to be sensible. In your book, you talk about the taxes, and they all seem to be the former Soviet Union countries that all have flat taxes now.
We talk about flat taxes, folks like Art and I, and people say, oh, that's unrealistic. But the reality is there's 25 countries around the world now that have adopted flat taxes. The average rate is 17%. Countries like Russia have done fantastic under a flat tax.
Didn't Georgia get into a flat tax war with Russia? Russia was trying to put Georgia, punish them, and so they had a flat tax and they kept dropping it, and Georgia won. That's
right. All those Eastern European countries are competing against each other to lower their rate. For example, Slovakia cut their flat tax rate to 19%. All the big German corporations like the car companies moved to Slovakia.
Okay. So we're talking now about a VAT, which would be crippling on top of everything else, would it not?
It would be.
Yeah, the average VAT rate in Europe is 20%. So think about every time you go to the store, you buy a car, you buy a new piece of furniture, 20% government sales tax on top of everything you buy.
That's federal, by the way. You got state and local as well.
Yeah,
tell me,
that's right.
Who are these economists that think, I mean, I just can't imagine that people actually think these things would work.
I think some economists just believe that if more resources are channeled through the government, somehow that helps society. But I think it profoundly damages society, as we've found over and over.
If they push these things through, they keep spending like this, they do a global carbon tax. We have to pay for the health care bill now. All of these things, additional. How much time, I know you're a sunny, optimistic guy, how much time do you think we have?
Well, things start spiraling out of control. We've got trillion-dollar deficits now under Obama. He plans to run trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. You can't do that, though, because federal interest costs accelerate faster and faster. So under Obama's current budget, I mean, we pay $200 billion a year in interest now, and he even admits that's going to jump to $800 billion. It's going to quadruple just in 10 years.
And that doesn't count unfunded liabilities, which are just enormous.
We're going to go into that here in just a second. All this week, we're going to tackle the federal budget. Back with me now, Chris Edwards of the Cato Institute, Art Laffer, former Reagan economic advisor. And guys, we only have a few seconds here, so I just want to go over this and correct me where I'm wrong. The problem we have right now is from here to here, nothing can be touched, correct?
No, we can reform entitlements.
Yes. But we
have to.
Yes, we have to.
Yes.
But generally speaking, you need an act of Congress to do.
It's much more difficult.
Okay. So, and this at 7%, we are currently at the lowest interest rate we've had.
And even Obama says that's going up to 15% of that slice. That slice is doubling in size in 10 years under Obama.
So we are here in 10 years without even the interest rate going up.
That's right.
We're up to here. The interest rate, if they were as high when you got into office with Ronald Reagan, it would probably be this much.
It would go up, if we had 10% interest rates, it would go up to 30%. 1/3 of the budget will be interest.
No. When we came into office, the prime interest rate was 21.5%, just so you remember. Right. I know you guys weren't around because you're so young, but it was 21.5%. Can you imagine the U.S. economy?
Well, what would happen?
it would be around this twice. We've had.